St. Louis, Missouri, October 24, 1944, past midnight. The gun was heavy. Chuck Berry was 17 years old when he picked it up. He'd never held a weapon before, and the metal was cold, colder than he expected, like gripping winter itself in the palm of his hand. A shiver ran through his body as his fingers wrapped around it, traveling up his spine to the back of his neck. It wasn't fear, it was excitement. Or maybe he didn't know the difference yet, because at 17 some things are impossible to tell apart. In a dark parking lot in Kansas City, pulled from the rusted trunk of a stolen Buick, this gun was going to be the key to three young men's California dream. At least that's what they thought. But the journey that started that night wouldn't take Chuck to the golden shores of California. It would take him to the gray walls of Missouri, a federal reformatory, a 10-year sentence. And nobody, not his friends beside him, not his family waiting at home, not even Chuck himself standing there with a gun in his hand, knew this was the beginning of rock and roll history. Not yet. 3 months earlier, St. Louis, the Ville neighborhood, July 1944. The Ville didn't exist on the city's map. Well, it didn't exist on the white folks' map. Segregation wasn't just on buses, in restaurants, at water fountains. It was in the stares, in the silences, in the invisible lines drawn everywhere. White people didn't come to this side of town. Even the police rarely showed up unless there was trouble. Chuck grew up on these streets. Cracked sidewalks, faded paint on wooden houses, old folks sitting on porches in the evenings, a church on every corner, a promise of hope in every church. His father, Henry Berry, was a preacher, gave sermons every Sunday at the little church down the block. His voice was strong, but his wallet was weak. His mother, Martha, spent 6 days a week washing clothes and ironing at white families' homes. Her hands were always red from the chemicals in the hot water. There were 6 children in the Berry household. Chuck was one of the oldest, and he was bored out of his mind with school. There was a world outside this neighborhood. The voices on the radio, the photographs in magazines, the movies at the cinema. California, Hollywood, beaches, palm trees, shiny cars. Chuck wanted all of it. But how? As a preacher's son on the narrow streets of the Ville, as a young black man, how? That summer he found his answer in 2 friends, James Venerable and William Jordan. They were surrounded by the same walls, lost on the same streets, asking the same question. "Let's go to California," James said one evening. The 3 of them were sitting on a street corner, the sun going down, the sky turning red. "What's here for us anyway? Same streets, same stairs, same nothing. We gonna spend our whole lives here." Chuck took a drag from his cigarette, let the smoke out slow. "With what money? We ain't got 5 cents between us." James laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone making plans. Money can be found, long as you got the nerve. 3 weeks later, Chuck dropped out of school. Didn't tell his family, just walked out the door one morning, didn't go to class, never went back. James and William did the same, and the 3 of them took their first step toward the California dream. Nobody stopped them, maybe nobody even noticed. October 1944. The road to Kansas City. The Buick was an old model, 1938, maybe 39. The paint was faded, the engine coughed, but it ran. They'd stolen that too from a field outside St. Louis, keys left in the ignition. That was their first crime. Auto theft. Past midnight on the outskirts of Kansas City, they pulled into an empty parking lot. The air was cold, their breath turning to steam. "Check this out," James said. He popped the trunk. Inside was a rust-stained rag, and under the rag, a gun. Chuck stared. His heart started racing. "What's that?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Insurance," James said. "California's a long way. We need travel money." William leaned in, picked up the gun, turned it over in his hands, weighing it. "Is it loaded?" he asked. James shrugged. "Don't know, but neither does the guy on the other end." Chuck took the gun. The metal was cold. It stuck to his fingers. It looked heavy, dangerous, but also powerful. Holding it, he felt different, like he was someone with something to say to the world. And in that moment, in that dark parking lot, next to a rusted Buick, at 17 years old, Chuck Berry's life split in two, before and after, but he didn't know yet what had begun. The first robbery, a small grocery store on the edge of Kansas City. Late at night, inside an old man behind the register, reading a newspaper. Yellow light, dusty shelves, empty street. Chuck stayed in the car, engine running, hands on the wheel, eyes on the door. His heart was pounding like a drum in his chest. James and William went inside. James had the gun. 5 minutes, maybe less. When they came out they were running. A paper bag in their hands, maybe $100 inside, maybe less. Chuck hit the gas. The Buick groaned. The tires screamed. A mile later on a deserted road they stopped. James was smiling, out of breath. "You see that? Easy as pie." Guy didn't even move. Chuck said nothing, but there was a strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't exactly fear either. It was like he'd broken something, and that something would never be fixed again. Someone was whispering inside him, his father, his conscience, his future self. He couldn't tell, but Chuck ignored it. Maybe that's what being young was. Not hearing the whispers. "Let's keep going," he finally said. His voice was hoarse. "This ain't enough." Second robbery, third, fourth. Each time it got easier. Gas stations, small shops, empty stores. They hunted at night, hid during the day. On the second robbery, Chuck went inside for the first time. The gun was in his hand, that heavy, cold metal. The cashier's face. No, not her face. Her eyes. Those eyes cut right through Chuck. Pure fear. Naked, primal fear. Seeing your own reflection in someone's eyes as something monstrous, that's something you don't forget. Chuck would see that look in his dreams for years. But they didn't stop. They should have. They couldn't. And then they got caught. They were heading back to St. Louis. Pulled into a parking lot to rest. Sirens exploded into the night. Red and blue lights flooded the Buick. Chuck squinted, instinctively reached for the gas, but it was too late. One police car in front, one behind. They were trapped. "Don't move." The megaphone voice, metallic and cold. Doors opened. Hands went up. Faces hit the asphalt. Handcuffs clicked onto wrists. The metal was cold, just like the gun. They found the weapon. A cop held it up to the light. "Empty," he said. "Not a single bullet." Chuck learned it right then. The gun had never been loaded. All those robberies, all those people he'd terrified, all that feeling of power, it was a lie. The weapon in his hand had been a toy, but that detail wouldn't matter in court. St. Louis, Missouri, December 1944. The courtroom. The room was cold. Wooden benches, high ceiling, pale light. Winter sun filtered through the windows but brought no warmth. Chuck sat in his prison uniform, hands in his lap. Somewhere behind him was his mother. He could hear her crying soft sobs. His father sat nearby, still as stone. A preacher. A dignified man. His son in a courtroom. The judge sat behind his bench. Old white-haired glasses perched on the tip of his nose. When he looked at Chuck, Chuck didn't see a human being in those eyes. He saw a file. A number. A statistic. Black, male, 17 years old, armed robbery, auto theft. The lawyer stood up. A young man, court-appointed. He was doing his best, but his voice was weak. "Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender. He's a minor." The gun was empty. Not a single bullet. No physical violence was used. No one was harmed. The judge listened, or pretended to. His eyes stayed on the file, not on Chuck. The prosecutor spoke. "Armed robbery. Interstate crime. A danger to society." And then the verdict. The judge took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on. That gesture, slow, careless, was branded into Chuck's memory. 10 years, the judge said. His voice was flat, like he was reading the weather. Federal reformatory. 10 years. The room spun. Chuck's stomach turned. His mother cried out a broken, choked sound. 10 years. 17 years old. First offense. Empty gun. James got 5 years. William got 4. Chuck got 10. Why? Nobody explained. But Chuck understood. In that courtroom on that winter day at 17 years old he understood. The rules weren't the same for everyone. The scales of justice were unbalanced, and the balance shifted depending on the color of your face. That lesson was carved into Chuck Berry. It would never come out. Algoa Reformatory, Missouri, 1945. The first nights were the worst. The cell was small. Concrete walls, iron door, a tiny window in the ceiling. Moonlight seeped in at night but brought no warmth. Chuck would lie on his bunk, stare at the ceiling, count 10 years, 3,650 days. That number was a vast darkness, and Chuck felt lost inside it. There was anger, there was shame, there was regret. Yes, that too, especially at night, when he thought of his mother. But most of all there was emptiness, like something had been ripped out of him. His youth, his hope, the California dream. Those first months he barely spoke. Other inmates approached. Some threatened, some offered friendship. Chuck did the same thing to all of them. He stared. Stone-faced, expressionless, cold. He learned that look here, the survival look. And then maybe in the third month, maybe the fourth, something happened. On the east wing of the reformatory, there was a music room. Old, dusty, forgotten. Inside, an abandoned piano, a few acoustic guitars, mandolins hanging on the wall, yellowed sheet music scattered on the tables. Chuck walked in one afternoon, by accident. Wandering the corridors to dodge work duty, he found the door ajar. He brought his fingers to the piano keys. A simple note, a single sound, but something stirred in Chuck's chest, something that hadn't stirred in a long time. From that day on he spent every free minute in that room. He learned piano by ear first, then from sheet music. He learned guitar. He played blues, the mournful melodies of the Mississippi Delta. He played jazz, the rhythms of Chicago's smoky nightclubs. Music took shape under his fingers, and Chuck, maybe for the first time in his life, found himself. The gun hadn't given him freedom, but music could. This wasn't just a metaphor, it was a discovery. The instrument of power in his hands would change. The guitar would take the place of the gun. He joined the reformatory's music group. They performed. When Chuck took the stage, even the guards watched, and he saw the shift in their eyes. Not the look you give a criminal, the look you give an artist. They wrote a good behavior report. His sentence was reduced. 10 years became 3, but the anger inside Chuck, that didn't go down. It never would. 8 years later, Chicago Chess Record Studio, May 21, 1955. The studio was small. From outside, an ordinary building, brick walls, faded sign. But inside, history was being made. Muddy Waters had recorded here. Howlin' Wolf, Little Walter, the giants of blues. And now Chuck Berry. He was 28 years old. After getting out of the reformatory, he'd gone back to St. Louis, worked as a hairdresser, played music in bars at night, got married, had kids, built a normal life. But the voice inside him, the one he'd discovered in that reformatory music room, never went quiet. He met Muddy Waters. Muddy listened to him, nodded, gave him a name, Leonard Chess. Now he was in the studio. A red guitar in his hands, Gibson ES 350T. Standing in front of the microphone. He didn't have a gun in his hands anymore. He had a guitar. The recording started. The song was called Maybelline. When it hit the radio, everything changed. It climbed the Billboard charts. White kids, black kids, everybody listened. Rock and roll was born. And Chuck Berry began to change the world. In 2016, Rolling Stone readers voted Chuck Berry the man who invented rock and roll. In 1977, Johnny B. Goode was recorded onto the Voyager disc sent into space as one of the sounds representing humanity. Berry Park still stands in Missouri. The music complex Chuck built. Every year on his birthday, people come, play their guitars, sing his songs. He died in 2017 at 90 years old. The world mourned, but few people knew about the reformatory music room. Few people remembered the 17-year-old kid, the empty gun, the 10-year sentence. Keith Richards said years later, he was the hardest man, demanded cash up front, didn't trust anybody. But maybe he was right. Maybe he'd seen more than all of us. Chuck Berry's life was a paradox. His hardness became legend. His paranoia became caricature. The difficult man label stuck, but nobody asked why. Why did he demand cash up front? Because he'd been robbed. Why didn't he trust contracts? Because the system hadn't trusted him. Why did he count every dollar? Because at 17 a judge had given him 10 years on his first offense as a minor with an empty gun. Distrust wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival strategy. That October night in 1944, a kid made a mistake. A big stupid mistake. But the system showed no mercy. It gave him 10 years, and Chuck Berry never forgot that mercilessness. Never. The judge saw a criminal that day. A number in a file, a statistic. He didn't see a revolution. And Chuck Berry, the man who no longer held a gun but a guitar, made the world hear his voice. The judge hadn't seen it, but the world did.